Hello and welcome to all the ghouls and vampires out there. I'm Joe here with Ms. Makao Stan.
Hello and greetings.
And today we're reviewing Friday the 13th Part 2. Part 2. The movie starts off with Alice having nightmares of the first movie. Now, you ended up pointing out earlier while we were watching that the first movie and Jason's relationship with Pamela really feels very Hammer-ish. And yeah, why?
And the
themes seem very much like a Hammer movie.
far more than Halloween does.
Yeah, maybe that's why we kind of like this franchise more. Anyways, this movie has as a main character not Alice because she dies in the first, well, I don't know what to say, prologue? In the first act of the film. The first almost 20 minutes are basically just Alice and closing up the part 1 plot. With Jason being kind enough to take the water off the stove, for example, so he does have some manners. He is a little civilized. This after helping avert a Georgie and Pennywise plot. Yeah, there's a kid playing in the rain, and that's a little bit of a funny nod to it. The movie then establishes that it doesn't take place 5 years after the first movie, but 2 months. And I think, and it's possible that Alice disappeared 2 months after the first movie, and then this is 5 years after that, I think that's the timeline. It's not exactly clear, but the idea is, in any case, we're going to have to do a timeline video on Friday the 13th. And we could do one on the various Halloween movies, because those are all different timelines, and it's a cluster. But the thing with this movie is that the main character is not a good girl like Alice, but rather a bit of a bad girl. She arrives late for work, is apparently seeing her boss, and uses that to weasel out of any trouble. And as to the other camp counselors, they don't seem like particularly troublesome kids. They're like in the ones from the first movie. They don't have too much personality, but Jenny's got more than enough to compensate. That said, the actors do a good job giving compassion and sympathy and character to these characters. But nobody really pays attention to that part because, while the senior counselors, such as Jenny and Paul, take off a local bar, the junior ones are left to mind the campsite and are murdered one by Jason, with Jason then targeting Paul and Jenny upon their return. And they leave some of their friends behind who are ironically going to survive, which is pretty funny. But ultimately, Paul and Jenny end up in a duel of sorts and a duel of wits with Jason, so that the two of them end up fighting him. Well, Paul ends up fought off, and Jason apparently believes he's killed him, and puts priority on chasing down Jenny. And Jenny ends up fending him off over the course of running away from him in the forest. And in a series of small skirmishes that are very, very referential in nature to the first movie, till she finds his shack and discovers that obviously Jason never discovered Jesus because he's worshiping his mom. I had to crack that joke. And
She would have been a terrible mother-in-law.
oh yeah, not that anyone would ever marry Jason because he has a face only a mother could love. And Jason ends up trying to hound her down and fight her from his shrine to his mom, where he's laid some of the corpses of the other camp counselors, which is very eerie and disturbing and disgusting. She, however, puts the moth-bitten, sorry, I'm so tired I can barely talk, the moth-bitten sweater of Jason's mom on, which is really disgusting. You could see her cringing and crying from just the very notion of putting this disgusting thing on. At which point she pretends to be Pam, saying, "Mother is talking to you," and Jason initially falls for it, kneels before her, only to then notice his mom's skull, at which point Jenny tries to deal the killing blow, fails. Paul comes to the rescue, and then Jenny deals the killing blow. Then somehow she ends up at the shack over in Camp Crystal Lake, the camp counselor house. And in the morning, she's found delusional and half crazed by paramedics, at which point she's dragged out of there. Now, here's the question. Who called the ambulance? And the thing is, she is crying out, Paul, 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 suggesting that she's lost her mind a little. Now, it's clear Paul is dead, although at what point he died is the question. Did he manage to call the police and an ambulance before he passed? Did he pass while in the shack? If he did die before she made it back, does that mean she basically dragged herself bleeding and a royal mess to the camp counselor house only to believe that Paul saved her because that's what she wanted to believe, at which point she called up the ambulance and the police and then passed out and they found her half crazed? Because psychology plays a large role in this film. You could go any way you want there, because she's a psychology major, and Jason, the way he hunts some of his prey in this movie is fairly psychological to an extent. So you have a certain amount of a psychological cat and mouse game happening. And she was obviously traumatized, and then her pretending to be Pamela Voorhees probably disturbed her a little. On top of that, the loss of Paul, the man she loved, also obviously affected her. So there's a lot of questions there about what really happened at the end. No matter what happened, though, I think it's undeniable that Paul's down, and she's obviously being escorted to the hospital, and she's going to either be in a psych ward for a bit, or she's going to need some serious therapy. Now, at the start of part 3, some of the teens are driving right by as Jenny is taken away. So, yeah, that's going to lead into the next movie, which retcons out this movie being Friday the 13th. So this movie is essentially what? I think Wednesday the 11th? So, yeah, it's either the 10th or the 11th. The events of the night of the murder. Because the next movie is going to conclude on Thursday the 12th, and then it's going to conclude on in the fourth movie as Friday the 13th. And one thing I do like about these 3 movies is that they work as a direct set of sequels to each other. Like, one quickly leads to the next. Bam, bam, bam. So that there's a certain sequential sense to it. And that was really well done on their parts.
One thing I actually do enjoy about Friday the 13th, as we mentioned Hammer. We can still feel an element of horror in this movie. Yeah, slasher may be
the genre, but the thing is, Jason does come back from the dead a few times in the franchise. Now let's rate this movie. I'm actually going to say this is a 2.5.
A good 2.25.
Mm-hmm. This is probably one of the more solid Friday the 13th movies, even if it is Wednesday the 11th, technically speaking. But Wednesday the 11th wouldn't be as catchy a title. So, anyways, don't forget to smash that like and that subscribe button if you enjoyed this video.